This story includes details of deep personal loss and struggles at the height of the AIDS epidemic in Canada. Please take care of yourself as you listen to this episode. Welcome to Part 2 of Queer Legends' Parc de l'Espoir, or the Parc of Hope story. I'm your host, Shawn, and this is Episode 7 of Queer Legends, an oral history podcast. This story begins celebrating a new year. It is January 2020. And to start off this new year full of hope and optimism, Montrealers have been called upon to respond to an online survey to digitally rubber stamp their approval of a new third design of Parc de l'Espoir. I was once a public servant, so I cannot begin to tell you just how frustrating this whole city process has been. But then again, it's been like this since the very beginning. World AIDS Day, December 1st, 1991. To tell you how it all went down, here are ACT UP Montreal co-founders Blaine Charles, who joined me from New York City, and Michael Hendricks, who I spoke with in Parc de l'Espoir.
I remember when we first announced it, when we went in the park, it was just like a mess. And we had to clean it up a little bit just to, make it presentable. And then we did something where on the tree we wrote names of the people who had passed and hung.
We put up 1,200 black ribbons, which indicated the number of people that had already died that we knew of. So the city took them all down that following week.
What was the village's reaction to the city taking those down?
It was bitter cold. They did it in Christmas week. And so it was bitter cold there. Nobody paid any attention. ACT UP paid attention. And so they came back, we came back, and we put up 1,200 more ribbons, this time multicolored, much prettier. It wasn't so morbid. But, they stayed. The city decided to leave them alone.
It was a visual, it was such a visual, symbol manifestation of what we were up against. And also too, the fact that the park was insignificant and trash was a representation of how we were viewed as a community, and then to come in and polish it up and clean it up and bring attention to it. I mean, it was all very symbolic.
Then during the that winter of 92, the community started adopting the place, and you started finding ribbons with names and dates on them and teddy bears.
In other words, all the things associated with memorial. Parc de l'Espoir has always been more than just a park. It's our community's cenotaph, our war memorial.
We started decorating the park in that way with the names of the people we knew who had died, written on ribbons and hung in the trees all over the place. And then a lot of people started doing that, and we realized that this was something, it was a form of mourning that was unavailable to us as a community, because no one, churches, whatever, you couldn't even get a funeral home to bury the person. So it was a real problem, we weren't able to react normally to death and dying and grief. And so the concept of the park came into being, but not what it looks like now.
It was really crazy. I feel like that the park was like a physical manifestation of the, a physical manifestation of the disrespect, disunification, and there's another word I want to use, of the community.
Here is longtime Montreal journalist, pundit, and queer about town, Richard Burnett.
I have a feeling that when people walk past Parc de l'Espoir in the village, that I don't even think it registers. I just kind of think it looks like a place where the people hang out and maybe sit down for a few minutes to have a cigarette. I don't really think people really understand the history of the park and what it means to a few generations of queer people in the city.
I loved the idea of the park. I was so enthusiastic. I was so anticipating how the park was going to be.
This is Claude Phileas. He created the legendary 1990s events called Hot Chocolate and Girls in the Hood.
And I've had a lot of friends who I've lost to AIDS. And I wanted a park. I wanted an outdoor auditorium. I wanted trees, laneways, music station, maybe just like a place where we can have tables and outdoor tea or whatever, stuff like that. Just so much that these people deserve, because the people that we lost, I feel like we lost the most important people of the gay community, the artists, okay? And it's a lot of things, a lot of things that we've lost. A lot of people, good people that we lost because of AIDS. And then we got Parc l'Espoir. And I might upset some people here, but it became a joke because people was like, this is the Park of no hope, because it was depressing. We deserved way more than what we got.
That is true. In the 1990s, the city of Montreal agreed to spend a lousy $180,000 to build Parc de l'Espoir. That's about $380,000 in 2021 dollars, and that is still less than any other recent park renovation in the gay village, and there have been many in the last several years.
It's a time capsule. It's a memento mori. You remember you must die. It is what it is. It's a relic of that time.
A relic that stands as a tribute to the lives of thousands of Quebecers, most of them being gay or bisexual men. Many of those men died in the closet, never able to live openly as their true selves. To find out if Richard was right about people not understanding the significance of Parc de l'Espoir, I turned to one of Montreal's top-rated Airbnb experience hosts for answers. His historic walks through Montreal's gay village welcomed and informed several hundred tourists from around the world in the 2 summers leading up to the COVID pandemic. His name is Ian Capstick. In full disclosure, he also happens to be my amazing husband.
You know, a lot of people probably say things like they would have walked past it, you know, or not understood its significance had we not stopped and actually looked at it. I mean, some people are obviously bothered by it, you know, some...
Bothered in which sense?
Like younger gay men particularly are taken aback that it's there. Being reminded of HIV and AIDS is not exactly in their everyday anymore. So, I mean, I think it's...
Sorry to take you out of your protective PrEP bubble, but...
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that part of it as well is that they're... You know, I led tours for people from all over the world. So I think a lot of people were just sort of surprised that it existed in the first place.
Surprised that, in which sense?
There aren't many AIDS memorials worldwide. It's not like every city has one. There are very few of these, and ours is one of the first. So I think the fact that it also doesn't look like a traditional memorial, it doesn't look like a grave site, people remark on that quite a bit, that it's an open and public space. People also remark on the fact that it's the only space in the village that is free, the only space in the village that older people seem to gather in. And both of those things are absolutely true. I think particularly gay men of a certain age, you know, tears, you know, a lot of memories. You can see them thinking about and understanding the significance of that space as it relates to their own struggle in their own life and in their own community. You can definitely see that. It provokes a lot of stories on particularly the daytime tours, less on the nighttime tours. The nighttime tours, people want to rush past it. People don't want to talk about it. You know, I don't think very, very rarely on the nighttime tours where people are like, well, let's stop in the AIDS park and have a long conversation about this. People are inspired by the activism, for sure. They're inspired by the heroics, but they don't want to dig too deep. Daytime tours, people like to dig. They wanted to ask questions about who created it and why it was there. They wanted to know about the fight with the city. People were incredibly inspired by all of that. But they also did say that the park was in an absolute shambles, because it was. You know, like the park has always been the victim of homophobic graffiti, and in more recent years, it's just been the victim of city neglect. Not out of homophobia, but just out of incompetence.
Let's talk about the city's online survey. The survey's webpage was filled with old, outdated images of the park, each from different eras with no context, sitting right next to images of a promised colorful future with a giant red AIDS ribbon replacing the park's original Garden of Life towards the back, but keeping the black granite stones at the front.
They asked here, you know, would you like to have a universal symbol of the fight against HIV/AIDS?
In the red ribbon that they proposed.
Right. That's what they proposed, but the question does not ask about that. The question asks specifically about the symbol. You know, would you like that, not that symbol, but would you like a universal symbol? Okay, so the answer, who's going to say no to that? So 187 people say yes to that. But that lacks the context that at the very beginning of this fight, gay men, English and French, New York and Montreal, had a significant fight about the color of these ribbons. And while that might seem small and insignificant to the 187 people who filled in the survey, they're not really the ones who matter. Because the ones who matter are ACT UP Montreal, who were there in 1990 putting up black ribbons. So at what point do you turn to that community specifically and say, how should your dead be memorialized? Because this plan doesn't do it. Putting a giant red AIDS ribbon does not memorialize people who have passed away.
My husband, Ian Capstick, also happens to be one of Canada's foremost experts on social impact strategy, communications, and public consultations. He spent 9 years on television as an independent political pundit for CBC News Network's Power and Politics, so he knows a few things about surveys.
Reports like this don't help us get to the middle ground, though, because they, again, only act as tools for bureaucrats and institutions to implement what they want, and that's really, I think, as you're discovering what this podcast is really about, so yes, it's about the park. Yes, it's about all of these fights that are ongoing, but really it's about how much larger institutions who want something are going to get it no matter what. I mean,
what's your reaction to their use of old photos of the park?
When we're talking about things like ribbons and others, there were photos in there of the park when it was first founded, when it had, small black ribbons in the trees. Then they chose also photos of the memorial ribbon poles at the end of their life cycle. And I mean, I think that it's also fair for us to recognize that the park hasn't been tended to. For many, many years, the men and women who've tended to the park and held ceremonies there have gotten so old that they're not climbing up there to cut down the old ribbons anymore. So yeah, guess what? It's going to look ratty. So part of what the city needs to be doing here too in the long term, and again, a survey doesn't get us to this, what the city needs to do in the long term here is decide how a place like this is to be governed. Because it's not just a city park that's named after a gay men's health crisis. It's just not. It's much more deep than that to the people who are touched by that. And that's not just queer men, right? That's their sisters and their mothers and every single one of their friends. Those types of folks need to be welcomed down into the village and know that there's a place outside of the church where there's a beautiful memorial to people who died, that they can go and have a contemplative moment, that they can watch the world go by, that they can talk amongst other survivors. So I mean, the park doesn't do that right now, and it hasn't done that for years. But again, turning it into a generic City of Montreal park that has a big red ribbon running through it isn't going to do it either.
I know there's only so much sexy that I can squeeze out of survey results, but it's important that you hear this eye-opening analysis of the city's consultations process. Don't forget, these survey results end up deciding what gets built.
On this poll, you've got 112 people who only occasionally or never go to the park. That's almost half. So can we cross-tabulate out those people and see what these responses look like again? And that's what good analysis and good research does. This is not good analysis and good research. This is just reporting back top-line numbers. So part of what is important here is to say, and we can't ask them for these crosstabs, and they can't provide any meaningful crosstabs because they didn't ask the right questions. Because wouldn't you like to know what gay men over the age of 50 think about this? I would, because that would be the natural number that we would choose. So from a marketing and from a demographic point of view, this is not a poll that would be valid in a commercial setting or a political setting. So why is it valid for urban planning? The only question that they slightly asked that touches the LGBT community is a question on gender. And as anyone can tell you, that is not a reliable or helpful indicator of anything these days. So fundamentally, they really fucked up how they collected the data in the first place. And therefore, when they present to the next community meeting, everything's okay. Look at all the green, look at all the big green, boxes filled with all these positive responses. it's kind of useless.
There was no follow-up community meeting, but we fast forward now to mid-March 2020 and a teleconference hosted by Councillor Robert Baudry. The call was to discuss the online survey results with Michael Hendricks, his husband René Leboeuf, and Roger Leclerc. Hendricks invited me to join them. As expected, Monsieur Baudry started by saying how happy they were with the public's support based on their survey results. Discussions with Baudry and his team focused on things like plans and the design of the ground tiles for the park, the process needed to designate the park as a public space, which would mean that police couldn't kick people out overnight. And, well, speaking of police...
Est-ce que la police a été consultée en ce qui concerne le réaménagement du parc? Sûrement.
After some awkward silence, officials each confirmed yet kind of asked the others to confirm that indeed the police had been consulted. It was kind of like listening to a game of hot potato. In the end, it was confirmed that police had no comments or concerns about the refresh of the park.
Je suis un peu surpris que la police, pour une fois, n'ait pas de commentaires.
I'm a little surprised that the police, for once, are not adding any comments, says Roger. In my entire history of dealing with the police, this is probably the first time, he says.
The police have never liked that wall. They felt that they should have an aquarium here. I wasn't against it, but the architects decided this, and that was their call.
Aquarium? Or a fountain?
They wanted an aquarium.
Fish?
It's something you could see through. Like a glass. They wanted a glass box so that you could see all the way through it from one end to the other. It seems to be too much trouble for them to go to the alley and look. They want to see it from the street.
Well, the rest of the call touched on the importance of the park's original black granite stones, the poles for ribbons at the center of the park, and so on. It was polite and it was constructive.
Tous les autres participants ont quitté la...
Merci.
Nous aussi.
Puis, qu'est-ce que vous...
What do you think? Penses-tu?
That's good.
J'ai trouvé qu'il demandait une certaine ouverture.
Michael Hendricks says he found they were showing a certain openness that he hadn't seen when dealing with bureaucrats in the past. It was necessary to raise this up to the level of elected officials again, just like in the 1990s. Now, what about that giant red ribbon?
We just can't forget that ribbon. It will be there, and it will be light. But it's okay for me. It's not. I won't make a battle for that. It's a little bit funny, as far as I'm concerned. A little bit.
The 1990s are calling, and they want their red ribbon back.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Dated. And everybody has a ribbon now.
Yeah.
Originally, it was the only ribbon.
Yeah.
And it was a very brilliant public relations idea for Amphar in the United States to invent it. But it is dated, and it never was particularly Quebecois or Canadian.
No.
Roger, what do you think that is? Why was the red ribbon never a thing here in Quebec?
Yeah, the red ribbon was used. I remember that I made multicolor arc-en-ciel ribbon for le Centre communautaire des gays and lesbians. We sold them one box each ribbon, and
$1.
$1, and we had probably around 1,000 sold. Well, we always use the red ribbon in the HIV's community, but when there was a multiplication of ribbons, then we just forgot that one because it's useless. Everybody has a ribbon. White, red, pink, green, so far.
It reflects the time a little bit.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but the most important thing actually is to maintain what's there, the big coffins, right?
Yeah.
No, they're stones.
Stones, yeah. Yeah, for us it was the main structure to reserve because this is the symbol of the place. This and the little park in the back, where we can sit and have discussion or just sit there.
Peace.
Yeah, both things were important, and it seemed that they're gonna conserve that. Keep that. So that's good for me. it's good.
What do you think?
How can I object to the red ribbon? It was so important in those days for us to be able to demark ourselves, to make ourselves stand out from everybody else. To wear it was to wear the sign of SIDA. And that took guts, because you were admitting that either you were seropositive, or you knew about people, or you cared about them. All of those things were taboo. And it was important. But with the proliferation of ribbons for $1 each, for any cause, whatever it be, flat feet, you could get a ribbon. It became less meaningful. It never caught on in Canada, because Canadians are what they are. They're contrarian, and they had their own ways of expressing themselves. But we certainly used it. And it was around, but like Raji said, we also made them gay-specific here in Quebec.
We have to avoid Las Vegas.
Yes. What did you think about the discussion of the legal status of the park? That is, making it into a place publique, a public place, rather than a park. The difference being that parks are closed at midnight and open at 6, whereas public spaces are open at all times. The reality is that little park on the corner of Panay and St. Catherine is open at all times, and it's frequented.
But it's interesting. I didn't know that that's a new law who force parks to close at midnight and open at 6. There wasn't like this before.
It came in 1976,
yes.
77, when the PQ started giving rights to gay people.
Yeah.
The police decided to close the parks forever to us. Not that it really changed anything, because we used to go in the parks with condoms, and after midnight they were very busy.
With or without.
I think the battle on the whole park versus public space will continue for some time, long after the renovation.
I don't think we'll win it.
Yeah,
honestly.
It will be a long battle, but I think we will win. And we have to do that in the next 2 years, because this government, municipal government, seem to be listening to us. And we have to use that.
While things were looking up for the Parc de l'Espoir refresh, everything, and I mean everything, was about to come to a stop. This conference call took place just before Quebec Premier François Legault plunged the province into its first COVID-19 lockdown. And then we waited. After 5 months and no news about the refresh, Parc de l'Espoir was suddenly closed when construction fencing went up one day in August of 2020. A few days later, a news release went out from the city about the construction timeline, and then not long after that, shovels went into the ground. The original black granite stones were set aside on Panay Street for the duration of the project until it was time to reinstall them. The large rusty steel plaque wasn't actually part of the previous official park design at all. It was installed by activists after construction. It will be tossed into storage and placed back in the park as well. Construction took about a year, and the inauguration of the newly refreshed Parc de l'Espoir was in August of 2021, hosted by Mayor Valerie Plante.
On y va, on va aller bonjour, Samy, comment ça va?
Bienvenue à cette inauguration du Parc de l'Espoir réaménagé.
Hey, listen to who it is. It's Brown Jacket Guy running the inauguration. He's the guy who yelled at me after the public meeting way back when. Well, at today's event, he smiled at me and he nodded hello, but he had no clue who I was. Well, after a few short pleasantries, Mayor Plante was welcomed by easily 200 or so people who had filled the park. Not bad for a Tuesday morning.
Alors, bonjour à tous et à toutes. I'm very excited to be here, surrounded by colleagues from the borough and previous elected officials that were there when La Place de la Paix, le Parc de la Paix, Hope Park was created in 1990. Monsieur Forcio, that is with us today. And originally why it was created is because the civil society fought to have a place to honor the memory of those who died of HIV/AIDS. And that was very important then, and it is still very important now, to honor the memory, but also to honor all the work of the survivors and people that are fighting to recognize and to fight discrimination. So So, with the help, of course, of the Borough Ville-Marie Borough, with all the teams and working with the civic society, we came up with this amazing concept that is more open, more place for green, universally accessible, which is also very important. And what we wanted to create is a place that everybody feels welcome, that is easy to get to, that you can sit or chat or have different activities. So I'm very proud to see all the community businesses, organizations as well, the borough and citizens that loves their village just like I do and we do, coming together to celebrate the new Parc de la Paix, Hope Park. De l'Espoir, excusez-moi. Yeah, I think did I say Peace Park? No, I didn't say that. Hopefully I didn't say that. Le Parc de l'Espoir, Hope Park. Thank you.
Well, that was awkward. The city councillor for the village, Monsieur Robert Baudry, said a few words next. Then Monsieur Roger Leclerc spoke. Roger is somewhat of a folk hero in Quebec's AIDS community. He was the Director General of what is now known as COQ-SIDA, a group of Quebec's top community organizations fighting against HIV and AIDS, and he held that influential role from 1996 to 2002. And on this day, he was speaking on behalf of Hendrix and Leboeuf and the living memory of Parc de l'Espoir.
Je revois beaucoup de visages familiers. On est un peu la Ligue du vieux poil.
I see a lot of familiar faces. We're a little bit like a league of old men, said Leclerc. Like Michael said, perhaps it's because we're nearing the end that they're celebrating us so much. We've never been celebrated like this. It reminds me of the struggles that we had to have to reach this point.
Je tiens d'abord à remercier Sammy Forcio.
I want to first thank Sammy Forcio, who was the first politician to dare support the gay community, who dared to give us our first park, which was a wasteland back then, but we got it after a hard struggle. It was a lot easier this time. Thank you, Sammy.
Facile maintenant. Merci, Sammy. Je veux surtout remercier l'administration de la mairesse Valerie Plante.
I want to thank the administration of Montreal Mayor Valerie Plante for the enormous work, respectful of our memories, that has been completed here. Particularly, Executive Committee member Robert Baudry, with whom we collaborated, councillor for the village, who accompanied us in a respectful and efficient way along this long and sometimes difficult road.
Nous sommes de la génération d'avant SIDA.
We are of the generation before AIDS, the one of pleasure, of gay humor, of marvelous parties and decor, with a sense of disguise and mystery, and above all, of sexual liberation and celebration. Leclerc said that the community, our community, still has not really learned from that era, noting that gays still represent more than 60% of those infected with HIV because of unprotected sex. Even with all those deaths, we have learned nothing, he said.
Je rêve du jour où ceci nous...
I dream of the day when this cenotaph will have no newcomers, that we can all have thoughts of the past and not of the present. And to conclude, I invite you to celebrate our village, our Park of Hope, and to celebrate life.
Célébrer la vie. Merci.
After all the remarks, the mayor was asked by media if she was satisfied with the project.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, that's me, but as long as everybody around, people that works here, that lives here, that comes and enjoy the village, if people are happy, I'm happy. But the fact that it was based on their needs and comments, and that this is what the success is all about. It is connected to what people wanted. So there you go. Merci.
What people wanted? Really? In the end, the Parc de l'Espoir refresh became the Park of Compromise, with the public's wishes shoehorned into the city's predetermined red ribbon design.
There doesn't seem to be any cultural sensitivity. You know, when you put out a survey like the one that they designed, when you don't have culturally relevant demographic information being collected, when you don't have any room for qualitative feedback to be reported back to the community. How are we supposed to hear about the stories of loss and suffering and memorial. How are we supposed to know about these things when you're only asking if you're okay with the sidewalk being enlarged? Well, that's not a culturally sensitive way or a trauma-informed way of consulting about something that is incredibly traumatic.
Before the mayor's speech, I was grateful to have a moment to speak with Monsieur Marc Pajot, one of the original architects of Parc de l'Espoir.
They asked us our opinions and what we thought were significative elements, which they did kept, like the controversial black stones and the masts, which are being used to put ribbons and stuff like that. So they kept some of the original idea, and of course the plaque itself, with à la mémoire des personnes décédées. So it's most of the important element for us were kept.
When this went in, it was like such a controversy,
Yeah, it still is today. I think people don't realize I get really emotional when I talk about it. Sorry, there was lots of suffering around it. So yes, it's sad, and AIDS itself is sad. So yes, we would like it to be more joyous, and I hope one day will be joyous thing. But for now, we're still remembering. There are still people, unfortunately, that are still affected by HIV/AIDS, and I think it's still important. So to keep it in that context.
At this point, I took a moment to thank Monsieur Pajot for all of the work that he and others had done to create the park. And then we both shared in a rather emotional moment, and then I asked him what he hopes will come from the park now.
I hope, it will kind of renew the idea, about discussing about AIDS, and for lots of people that are living alone or that have a departed one, it was a nice place just to sit around and remembering. So I still hope that it will serve that purpose. And it's not that sad, because if you think about it, there's so many people sitting there in the summer and enjoying themselves. So it's also a celebration of life amidst everything.
It's kind of funny that the most controversial aspect of the park was also the most social aspect.
Yeah, and it was done on purpose. It was, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
How important were those blocks to the politics of this park?
They were. People often see it as tombs, but we didn't see them as tombs. We saw them as black. Black is, of course, death, and it was like a big symbol.
Coffins, but some people say no.
No, they're not. They're just tributes. That's what they are. There is nothing associated to coffin with those blocks.
Now that he'd seen the update, was he still satisfied with Parc de l'Espoir?
Yeah, I am still satisfied. I think the add-on of the ribbon is an interesting one.
By interesting, Monsieur Pajot was being diplomatic.
I would not have thought about that.
Can I ask about the ribbon? Because at the very beginning, we didn't want a red ribbon.
No, we didn't want to.
The Montreal community.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm still okay with it. I think it has become like an international symbol, and most of the people, how can we fight it?
How could we have fought it? That's a good question. The city was going to reno the park with or without us. Hendricks, Leboeuf, Leclerc, and I helped preserve the most important elements of the original park. The city, well, it got its fancy new red AIDS ribbon, but even that was not delivered as advertised. The ribbon runs throughout the park and rises up from the ground at the back to form a round seating area. That entire ribbon was supposed to be illuminated from beneath, giving a red glow to the park. Instead, we got a cement ribbon painted with dark red paint with a smooth rise from the earth that just screams skateboard park.
This park is special. It's probably the most special park in the city. It actually really means something.
I know somebody recently told me that they were here and somebody came by and left ashes on the ground and behind the plants. So there are still people being buried here in various ways. We just don't know about it. It's not organized.
How do you think our community now should still be honoring those that were lost? Many of whom have no clue who they were anyway.
No. I think the only way to honor them is to remember that it happened and to pledge that it will never happen again.
I agree with Hendricks. Let's hope something like the HIV/AIDS crisis never affects our community or any community ever again. I also hope the City of Montreal changes its public consultations for something that is more inclusive and trauma-informed. Finally, I hope that after another 30 years, when I'm approaching 80, I won't have to go back to city bureaucrats with friends to save Parc de l'Espoir all over again. Thank you for listening. This episode was researched, written, recorded, and produced by me, Shawn Dearn. The executive producer is Ian Capstick. Queer Legends, an oral history podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you go for great storytelling.